I want to continue on my videos on the Civil War and just kind of talk about some things. In this video, I want to talk about, I guess, something that was a pivotal part of what caused the war and what caused the tension and everything, and that thing happened to be slavery. There were other things. Part of that was how part of that was kind of how the federal government can't kind of undermine the power of the states to do what they wished and to kind of have their own state laws, and it was kind of a bit of there were a lot of tensions as the North was very very different from the South. To put something very shortly, the North was a state or a part of the country that was very industrial and very progressive, if you will. The North was a part of the country that was always kind of developing, and most all the North didn't have slaves, and that can be because of a couple reasons. One of those reasons being that it wasn't profitable to them, so therefore they didn't have it, because of some of those industrial advances. Another reason was because of how the North felt a unease with owning slaves, and to kind of just sort of introduce the concept of actually having a slave. Slavery started when countries like England and France and Spain went to Africa and brought slaves back. And what a lot of people don't take into consideration is how the people in Africa were doing the same thing. They were making slaves out of their own people. So it can kind of be construed by some people, and I won't name who those kind of people are, or what they are. They can kind of make it seem that the whites were the people who caused all of this, and caused all of the pain and all of the suffering on the African American people, or the Africans. But they were doing a very similar thing. They were doing a similar thing in Africa, and that is a part of what gave them that sort of idea. So they brought slaves back to Europe, and when the American colonies were formed, slaves were brought there as well. And as the states grew, and past the Louisiana Purchase and such, kind of starting from past 1812, towards 1920, and between 1820 and 1860, there was sort of a division of the country, and a division in the House of Representatives and in Congress itself, because the North and the South were two very very different places, and they had different values. People in the South, the cotton was a very very big thing there, and basically cotton was something that was very very profitable for them, and the cotton thing just got huge in the South, and slave properties were worth up to $6 billion. So the slave ownership in the South, given the production of cotton, was very very profitable. So then you have people like the abolitionists and the government itself later on, sort of kind of asking, or sort of trying to push the issue of nobody ever owning slaves anymore. You can imagine how 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 badly that would be taken by them. That would be taken by them as trying to undermine their authority, trying to change their way of life. Because the North was changing a lot, through industry and such, but in the South, other than the cotton boom and everything, was pretty much the same. I say pretty much the same. So, as I'm talking here, a couple books I want to point out that I think are really good. This one, The American Civil War by Terry L. Jones. Another one that I have on my Kindle, on my iPad, my Kindle app on my iPad, which is called the Civil War by Louis P. Messer, and then I have this one, which is The Civil War by Bruce Catton. Those are kind of the books that I'm trying to sort of use in my little series here. So I guess I'm trying to think about that, and trying to think about in this video the sort of how the North and South were different, and the way slavery was, how cruel it was. If you watch movies like they had a movie recently came out which is called Django Unchained by Quentin Tarantino. That's a great movie. Even that by itself is great. So you have other movies like Mississippi Burning and such, and I'm trying to think of other ones from that time period. Also, you can read books like Killer Angels by Jeff Shara, and Shara has other books, Gods and Generals. It's like historical fiction, or yeah. Those are also good resources on the Civil War. So between 1820, Jefferson passed the Act Against the Importation of Slaves, I believe. Yeah. The act prohibiting importation of slaves passed by Jefferson. And from there, ever since the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and everything in this country becoming a country separate from England, the whole thing was slavery was something that was looked at as well as something that not everyone agreed on. It was kind of tabled, if you will, tabled and thought about to kind of maybe consider at a later point. And from 1820, past the act by Jefferson, you had a man named Henry Clay. I love Henry Clay, and I want to do a video just about Henry Clay. Henry Clay is often referred to as the great compromiser. So from Clay, we had Calhoun, John C. Calhoun, who said that he was, because the states were thinking about seceding from the Union. Calhoun was against that, kind of pushing the fact that any state could nullify any act from the federal government that they deemed unconstitutional. So we had the Missouri Compromise and the 3/5 Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 and a good amount of other compromises, many of which by Clay. And I'll be getting into those, doing a video on each one of those compromises. I'm going to try and get very detailed in this series of mine. So a big thing was, issues as to whether issues of the state's rights being undermined. James Buchanan had that issue. That is one of the reasons in which he sort of had a policy of not doing anything towards the middle to the end of his presidency. And then we had Lincoln. And then we have something which is called the Gag Rule. The Gag Rule. Let's see. Oh, Fugitive Slave Act, or the Fugitive Slave Law, stated that any slave running towards the north would have to be returned to their owners, which at some points were enforced, but mostly wasn't. It mostly was not enforced, and it was really ineffective. And then we had the Gag Rule given by Senate, which was any kind of abolitionist legislation was tabled and kind of put aside. So, what and who were the abolitionists? And this is kind of misconstrued. It's often thought that Abraham Lincoln was a abolitionist, which he was not. Abolitionists, we had people like William Lloyd Garrison, Harriet Beecher Stowe, people like that. Garrison published something that I believe was called The Liberator. The whole thing, the whole aim of the abolitionists was to get all of the slaves emancipated as soon as possible, because the act of holding slaves and what was done to the slaves is highly morally wrong and just wrong entirely. So the whole aim was to emancipate all the slaves immediately, because slave ownership was wrong. And that was a lot of what happened. Frederick Douglass, which I want to be talking about in more detail soon, had a bit of a hand in that, since he was a freed slave himself. So basically, the president, the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, he was not a abolitionist, because he kind of favored a gradual end to slavery. He wanted slavery to sort of end, but very, very slowly. Slowly to kind of not bring a shock to the economy, since these slaves had a distinct effect on the way the economy in the South was. So I'm going to be using these books and talking about different things of the Civil War. Actually, the pre-Civil War, I'm going to be talking a lot about Henry Clay and the compromises and such, and kind of getting towards all these things before I actually get into talking about what happened at Fort Sumter.